All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm with Chris Paul of Hercules Metals, and we have a news release today, 3 days before Christmas. There's a bit to unpack here, but there's a silver lining in this news release, a silver gift, actually, a new discovery made in Southern Flats. So we're going to get into it with Chris. How are you, Chris?
Pretty good, man. How are you?
I'm great. I wasn't sure we would do another one of these before January, but here we are. Look, I want to definitely get into the silver portion of this at Southern Flats and the Hercules Rhyolite, which is the gift that keeps on giving. But before we do that, let's talk about the Porphyry drillings. Some of the holes here, I think it was a mixed bag. Hole 12 was a pretty good one. Hole 7, 8 were a little disappointing. So tell us about the Porphyry holes and what you learned in this round of assays.
Yeah, definitely. Let me share my screen here so we can actually have something to look at. Okay, so basically I'd say what we're learning is, I mean, we've always known that there's kind of these two zones, right, to the Porphyry. So you got the hanging wall zone and the footwall zone. And, you know, basically all that really means is you've got this relatively low grade porphyry stock, or sort of an elongate porphyry in the middle here. And on either side of that porphyry is where all the good mineralization hangs out. And so it sort of, you know, forms a bit of a shell, right? So think of the copper mineralization as a shell around this central porphyry intrusion. And so you're, you know, when we're on this side, we call it the hanging wall. When we're on this side, we call it the footwall. So we've known this for a while now, right? This is nothing new. And so really what the drilling is about is trying to better define the geometry of the footwall zone and better define the geometry of the hanging wall zone. And I would say what we've really found is that the footwall zone is basically just better. It's thicker. The grade is, you know, far more continuous. The hanging wall, I mean, it swells, especially in kind of the central area here, you know, around 2505. But then, you know, it gets a little skinny along strike. And we don't know. So it's open along strike in this direction. It may swell again, but really, I guess the bottom line we're finding is that all these holes that enter between these two dashed lines here, you know, enter this footwall zone where the mineralization is really thick and the grade is really good. And so that's where 12 was. And we obviously talked about, you know, a long strike with 15 and 18, and we're seeing, you know, this is definitely where it's at. And so to keep expanding this, we're going to keep stepping out in this direction. And I think this is really where the big tonnage is going to ultimately end up coming from, is this footwall zone. It's obviously the holes that were a little bit more disappointing, like look at 9. Like clearly this is not where you want to be out here, right? And, you know, a lot of the other holes in this news release that were disappointing because they really didn't make it into this thicker part of the footwall zone. So obviously this is something we learned, right, midway through the season. And then, you know, we're able to start, you know, the latter half after this, we're able to start really keying into where we want to be.
Okay, so footwall, much better than hanging wall. Was hole 2305 in the footwall zone?
Yes, it was. Yeah, exactly. So 2305 would be, I think this guy right here. So that last news release that we put out, which was on 2505, basically showed that there's about 750 meters wide section of continuous mineralization across, was it this fence here? Yeah, it would have been this fence here, the 2505, 2515, and 2305, which is over here in the footwall zone, all in the same fence. So the mineralization does also go above the porphyry as well. So like, even when you're between the hanging wall and the footwall, there's still a section sort of 100 to 200 meters wide section above the top of this low-grade central porphyry as well that's mineralized, which is kind of what 2515 passed through. So again, that sort of shell-like geometry, right? Hanging wall, footwall, but then they also merge together and form this shell that go above the porphyry as well.
Okay, got it. And is that because, is the reason why the footwall is clearly better than the hanging wall, is that because part of the hanging wall has been eroded, or is there some other reason?
It's tough to say. I wouldn't say we really have a great handle at this stage on why that is. It's a bit of a head scratcher because, I mean, if you started, like, let's say outside in, right, the pyrite shell, so outside of the copper shell, you get the pyrite shell. If we start in the pyrite shell and drill inwards, you know, you basically go through the copper shell and then you hit the low-grade central porphyry. So why it sort of gets skinnier, you know, away from the central area is tough to say. Why the footwall zone is just so much thicker, I don't think we really understand that yet. It just is what it is, I guess.
Okay. So if the footwall is better and we're thinking that there's potential to grow more tonnage in the footwall zone and stepping out further to the west, so that means that hole 2515 is a really important hole, which you kind of signaled in the last two, you know, news releases that should be a good hole. Also 2518 is suddenly a really important hole, and that hole is still ongoing. It looks like that you're pretty deep in 2518, but it's still going, and you pause, so that will resume in February. You know, what can you tell us about holes 2515 and 2518?
I mean, yeah, you kind of just said it, right? And we've obviously signaled that we like these holes and that we like the footwall zone in this area. Now, 2518, the only thing I'll really add to that is the fact that, yeah, I'll re-emphasize what you just said. It's still going. So you look at this hole trace here, right? So we've started way out here, and we are basically all the way out here now, and we had to pause for, you know, drillers kind of want to go home for Christmas, to be fair. So normally we would shut this hole down at, you know, when you're all the way out here, right? You can see like these holes that were drilled in 2024 intersected really low grade to almost no mineralization at all. And this 2518 has gone in under this hole, which is 24-1, which basically ended in low grade nothing. So what we had basically said was, okay, these three holes are in the pyrite shell. There's nothing out here. This is the edge of the system, and yet somehow 2518 is coming in maybe 65 meters vertically below this and is still in mineralization. I don't know if it's just a function of turning the drill around and actually drilling perpendicular to the system. And, you know, I think we've talked about this a lot before, is the 2023 and the 2024 drilling was really sort of oriented suboptimal because it was drilling parallel with the system. And so, you know, in a porphyry, we know that these are bulk tonnage, you know, relatively low grade systems, right? And so you're kind of either going to be in, like, call it 0.5% copper, which is your copper shell, maybe 0.6 for a long time, and you're just going to follow that copper shell and get a decent hole. But what can also happen, which the reason you don't really want to be drilling some parallel, is you can end up in that low grade porphyry. You can end up in the central low grade porphyry, or, you know, you can basically pipe some sort of late dike or late anything in the system that's low grade, and you'll stay in it for the whole hole. So it's a head scratcher why this is all the way out here below 24-1 and still going. But we decided that it was a tough decision to make, but we decided to leave the casing in the hole all the way out here leave the HQ casing in the hole, and we're going to come back at the start of February. So following the Roundup conference is the plan, and we're going to put the NQ back down there, and we're going to keep this going. And that was a business decision we had to make, because there's a strong likelihood that the HQ casing, we probably won't be able to retrieve that, right? So it's almost, we're sort of sacrificing all that HQ casing in order to keep this hole going. Then that was a decision we wanted to do.
Okay, so hole 2518 will continue in February, and the target depth there is 1,000 meters now. So that is one of the deepest holes you've drilled to date. In fact, it might be the deepest. Then hole 2521, which has been pre-collared, with the RC drill, that will be drilled with a diamond rig in February. And those are important holes. I mean, holes 18 and 21 are, I mean, I don't want to put any pressure, but those are really important holes.
Yeah.
Because hole 7 was a little disappointing. So it seems to me like hole 7 was collared too far to the east, and it wasn't able to really get into the optimal area of the footwall zone.
I would say it wasn't collared east enough or west enough. So what's happened here is the low-grade central porphyry swells, so it gets thicker. And so basically it's not really showing on this map, but that low-grade central porphyry is basically the zone in between the footwall and the hanging wall, right? So if you just imagine in between these dashed lines is where that you sort of don't want to be. And so 2507 is really centered right on that, right? It was centered right on the low-grade central porphyry where it swells. And so what happened is, obviously we always have to drill through the Jurassic cover, right? So this first part of this whole journey was going through the Jurassic cover, and then by the time it broke through into the unconformity and into the Triassic, the lower plate, the host rock, we were actually in high-grade hanging wall. And so I think it was roughly 50 meters or so of very good, nice hanging wall mineralization. And so really what we wanted to do is either back it up further east so that we can drill more of this hanging wall mineralization, or move it further northwest along the fence and actually target it straight at the footwall zone. But it was really just happened to sort of fall in between the two zones and drill mostly low-grade central porphyry. But I'd say the take-home message with this is just look at the grades at the end of the hole, right? So you can clearly see you come out of the low-grade central porphyry and the grades start increasing towards the footwall zone, which is where we have a lot of like 2326, 2406, a lot of holes. Like 2406 ended in bornite right here. And that was a hole that we lost in a bad fault zone in 2024. But there's clearly something, big and untested out here that these grades were increasing towards. So yeah, we're going to want to probably drill 2 more along this fence, one to actually properly test the hanging wall and one to properly test the footwall.
Okay. That's a good explanation. Yeah, I mean, the footwall zone is very promising, and I do recall hole 2406. There was some juice there at depth, but that was that start of that drilling program that just the odds, or the gods rather, were not, on our side at that point in time. Okay, so that puts a bow tie on the porphyry. We've got a lot of holes pending assays. We've got a lot more to come. I'm definitely very optimistic on hole 15. Let's move to hole 2506. I mean, this is the story of the news release. This is the story right now. So 2 main things stood out for me in hole 2506. First of all, you got into the porphyry, but only for a little bit, and you intersected bornite, chalcopyrite, and you got a sniff of gold.
Yeah.
And then what is going on with this Hercules Rhyolite there? We're used to like the Hercules Rhyolite being like 40 grams silver, 50 grams silver. You got 10.67 meters of 257 grams per ton silver with some pretty good hits of lead and zinc there for a total, silver equivalent grade of 420 grams per ton. What is going on there in hole 6?
Yeah, this is definitely where it gets interesting for sure. We came here in 2023 drilling for silver, and we found copper, right? We found the porphyry, and significant enough that we changed the name to Hercules Metals. So now, of course, we come to Southern Flats looking for porphyry, and of course, we find silver, which I'm not complaining at $67 silver. And I was almost a little worried that people are going to think, oh man, this is just, here we go, silver $67. Of course, we're going to see a silver promote coming back from old Hercules silver. But no, this was a shocker, man. And I don't know where to begin because there's so much, it's so different what's happening here at Southern Flats relative to the north, and I guess we'll call it Leviathan, yeah, I don't even really know where to begin. So let's start with basically the rhyolite. So we know up to the north in, what we would have called Hercules Adit or Frogpond, which is where they, historically defined around 24 million ounces of silver or something like that. We know all the silver is hosted in this one rock unit we call the Hercules Rhyolite. Okay, so I think the challenge with growing that historical silver deposit into anything huge, right, like anything in the hundreds of millions of ounces, is the fact that the rhyolite is, it's 50 meters thick, usually maybe 100 meters thick, but then you've got these other rock units like this andesite and this conglomerate that are interbedded within it. And so continuity becomes very challenging to build into something like a supergiant silver deposit up here. So what's really interesting, the first thing I'll say about Southern Flats is we've got this really young tertiary basalt cap, right? It's younger than everything, and that's always prevented historical drilling and historical exploration from doing anything here. So this has really never been tested. It's really never been explored. And so we drilled through that basalt cap, and we got down into the Jurassic, the typical Jurassic cover. And what we found is it's almost entirely rhyolite. And so you'll see these like multi-hundred meters stretches of just pure rhyolite. There's virtually no andesite, which is very dominant up in the north. It's gone, so that's disappeared. And there's just these two lenses of conglomerate, and that's it. It doesn't appear to be folded or doesn't appear to be faulted. The geology is just a lot simpler. It's a lot less complex for whatever reason under Southern Flats. It's kind of like a very simple layer cake, which is just dominated by really thick sections of rhyolite. And yeah, we've drilled 6 holes there now, and as you can see on the plan map, the yellow represents the intervals of Hercules Rhyolite that we've hit. So in 6 and 16 and 22, the basalt was really thick, so you go through a lot of basalt first. You have to drill through a lot of basalt first, and then you get the rhyolite, and then you get into the lower plate. But in in 24-16, 25-25, and 25-23, the basalt is not thick at all. So you kind of, I think it's within 40 or 50 meters from surface. You go kind of straight into the rhyolite. And so that's obviously, a big deal. And I guess the other thing that's really different is the style of mineralization is way different in Southern Flats. So if we think about the silver mineralization that we're used to seeing at Hercules Adit and Frogpond and the historical resource area, it's kind of disseminated. So this rhyolite is kind of like an ash tough unit, and it was kind of like a sponge for the hydrothermal fluids that came in, they brought the silver. And so when you get into the rhyolite, it's sort of just disseminated all through it. We see a very different style of mineralization in Southern Flats, and it's predominantly these discrete veins. These, we call them intermediate sulfidation epithermal veins. And when we first drilled them, we thought they weren't that important, because normally you got to see a ton of this stuff that we call dark gray sulfide, which is the tetrahedrite, the tennantite, which hosts the silver, the galena, the sphalerite. You got to see a ton of that to get good grade. Whereas in Southern Flats, you don't seem to need nearly as much sulfide to produce really, really, really high grade. And so the sulfides themselves, for whatever reason, in these discrete veins, are significantly higher grade than any other silver we've seen on the property. And so this starts to get really interesting. And I think what I'm getting at here is we don't know, this is obviously early days, but it's sort of looking like this could have been the volcanic center for the rhyolite, right? So it's dominated, the Jurassic was dominated by rhyolite here. You don't get much anything else. And actually Hercules Adit and Frogpond and these areas were actually quite distal to the epicenter of this intermediate sulfidation epithermal mineralization, which sort of came from the rhyolite. And so I would guess, or I would hope, that actually the source of the intermediate sulfidation epithermal silver we might actually be quite close to it now at Southern Flats. And there's a bunch of other stuff I can talk about with respect to that, but I'll just sort of end it there, because I think it's already a lot of information to take in.
Yeah, it is a lot of information. You know, with the Hercules rhyolite, what makes it different? Like, why isn't it just, rhyolite? Like, what makes it, when you see it, like, what makes it stand out?
Well, there's only one rhyolite unit here, and it's just Hercules Rhyolite is just the name that was assigned to it by the historical operators. Sort of give it a name. It's special. It hosts the silver mineralization that everyone was looking for 100 years, and that's really about all there is to it.
Okay. In hole 2416, so that was last year, you guys stepped down south of Camp Creek. You drilled a big step out there at Southern Flats, and you were in the rhyolite the whole time, basically. I mean, I think, yeah, there's a lot of rhyolite in that hole. What did you see in hole 2416, and how does that stack up to hole 2506?
In 2416, I've got to jog my memory, but I think you said it. There was a lot of rhyolite. It was starting, I think, 50 meters from surface. It was in the oxide. I do remember that. So it wasn't the sulfide that we see in 2506. In fact, I think, had only assayed a portion of 2416 at the time, because when we first came to Southern Flats, we didn't care about the rhyolite. We didn't care about the silver. We were trying to drill to find an extension of Leviathan. Now, 2416 didn't make it to the unconformity. And I think we only assayed about half the rhyolite, the first half of the rhyolite, and that's what we press released. And when we saw that there was silver in it, we've actually re-assayed the rest of that hole, I think, over last winter. And as you can see in the grade bars, the silver, it's basically kind of everywhere throughout the rhyolite. So there's sort of these high-grade discrete veins, but then you could just also take the entire rhyolite with all the silver and the lead and the zinc, and you could also kind of look at it as a really, really huge sort of discovery silver Cordero style giant bulk tonnage, low grade silver lead zinc deposit as well. Yeah.
So what makes hole 2506 really stand out is the high grade interval there that ran over 250 grams per ton silver and over 400 grams per ton, silver equivalent, and the sulfide veining, right?
Yeah.
So that really makes it stand out, and that's not like any other hole that you've seen so far across the property.
Well, not before 2506.
Okay.
Not
Got it.
before 2506. The other thing that we're now looking at is Pathfinder elements. Okay, so when we get the assays for 2506, they were shocking, right, to say the least, because again, we're used to needing to see like really strong dark gray sulfide over 50 plus meters to get anything meaningful for silver. We didn't see that. We saw these discrete veins with, you still had disseminated dark gray sulfide throughout it, but you just didn't have as much sulfide, and yet it produced far higher grades. In other words, this dark gray sulfide that we see visually has a far higher concentration of silver, lead, and zinc than anywhere else on the property. So when we first saw it, because the sulfide content was lower, we thought, oh, this probably isn't that interesting, right? This is probably just going to be even lower than we see elsewhere on the property. But it was the opposite. And so then, of course, when we got these assays for 2506, we've done a lot of looking at this. And one of the things we looked at was what other metals do we get with the silver? Are there Pathfinder elements? And sure enough, there are. So we do what's called a correlation matrix as geologists, and basically you're just looking at what other elements increase as silver increases, and the answer is arsenic, antimony, obviously lead, zinc, and manganese. So what's interesting is those elements all are very easily picked up by an XRF gun. So it's kind of interesting, right? We can sort of get a sense of already like where we like, because obviously we got 6 holes now in Southern Flats, and I'm not going to say anything more right until we get assays back, because it's just Pathfinder elements at this stage. But if this works, then we've got a tool, right? The XRF is a tool to almost tell you before you even get your assays what is good, right? If you just drilled a hole, even with RC, right, low cost, really fast, I'm thinking we come back here next year, we do a grid of RC holes over this area to try and hone in on the highest grade structure, which is probably running through this way here. And you got that XRF gun, right? And you can probably, assuming this works, you could probably know in fairly real time, roughly what you're in.
Okay, so let's walk it back a little bit. So hole 2516 was a deep step out hole to find a Triassic porphyry in Southern Flats. Hole 2522 was a deep step out hole to find a Triassic porphyry in Southern Flats. Hole 253 was planned to be a deep step out hole to find a Triassic porphyry in Southern Flats. It doesn't seem you found the Triassic porphyry just judging by those 3 holes, but you found something else in these 3 holes. So what did you learn from those 3 holes? And it looks like you hit a very thick package of the Hercules Rhyolite in hole 2523. So if you hit a thick package of the Rhyolite, hopefully with silver in 2523, why did the rig go all the way 1,000 meters to the northwest to drill hole 25?
To drill hole 25 was entirely designed based on porphyry. So we only recently got the results back for 6, right? Like,
got it.
We know it's been a really crappy year for assay turnarounds and things like this. There was a lot of, obviously there was a lot of over limits in 6. And so we only just got, like, this is brand new even for us, right? Like we're still wrapping our heads around this, this crazy silver mineralization in Southern Flats. So every single hole you see designed here was designed looking for the porphyry, is pretty much using that phase 1 MT data, testing different parts of the anomaly, trying to figure out where we want to go. And so 2525, you know, long story short, is basically this is where we think the porphyry is coming through. So if you look at these white dashed lines, right, like arrow, question mark, from all the latest data that we've seen, it looks like it's basically trending under this way, right? So now we've come back here with 2525, we've broken through the unconformity, and we've had to pause this hole. So this hole is currently paused at, it says 1200, that's target depth, it's not 1200 meters. It's paused at, oh God, maybe 900 meters or something like that below the unconformity, in a bit of a cliffhanger finish to the season. So we're not really gonna know what the porphyry potential is in 25-25 until we get back and drilling again in February. But yeah, every hole you see, none of these holes were looking for silver. This was all accidental. So it's kind of cool because when we actually come back and look for silver now, it's going to be done in a very systematic grid-based fashion, and obviously focusing on not where, you know, 2506 necessarily, where the basalt is 400 meters thick, but 2523, 2525, 2416, where the basalt is like 50 meters thick. And in fact, if we move another kilometer to the south from this, you know, we obviously went out and, like, you know, did some mapping, because the MT sort of shows you how thick the basalt is. And there was an area where it looked like there was almost no basalt. And so we went out and mapped it. And sure enough, we found that there's a full, complete erosional window through this basalt cap where you have altered Hercules Rhyolite exposed at surface over a kilometer to the south. So think about that too, just in terms of strike length, width, and thickness. If we're adding another kilometer of potential strike length on top of this, and who knows how far it's going to go for.
Yeah, that's my next question, Chris. So the Hercules Rhyolite has been mapped. It's been mapped many times over the last like 60 years, right? How extensive is it? How extensive is the scale potential here? And are there some spots on the Hercules land package where the Hercules Rhyolite could be buried under cover still, and you just haven't found it there yet?
Of course, yeah, exactly. I think that should be a take-home message right here, is exactly what you just said. So historically, the problem with this property was the rhyolite, just the continuity just wasn't great. You know, it's okay up here, and you do get, you know, that historical resource, and you get, you know, you get decent amount of it up here, but you also have the andesite, you also have the conglomerate, whereas you move down to Southern Flats, and it is thick. And I would say every one of these yellow intercepts here are probably almost certainly going to connect up as one thick bed of rhyolite across all this. So I would speculate, I don't know this yet for certain, we have to put some holes in between, but I would speculate almost certainly we're looking at one big thick continuous unit of rhyolite over what, 1 kilometer distance this way. It's kind of a triangle shape, so I can't say 1 square kilometer, but, you know, still 1 kilometer east-west and 1 kilometer northwest-southeast. So then you move another kilometer southeast and you see the same rhyolite. So the scale of the rhyolite, now when I say rhyolite, I'm not saying silver, right? The silver is inside. So the rhyolite's the host unit for the silver. But where you get rhyolite in pretty much seems like all the holes, somewhere within that is, you know, for example, hole 6, I think 250 meters of rhyolite. Let's actually just look at the grades here for a second, right? So, okay, blah, blah, blah. 257 meters. No, I'm not reading that right. 258 meters of basically just over an ounce per ton silver equivalent, right? So that would be like the whole rhyolite, just background is about just over an ounce per ton equivalent. Then you get down to 120 meters, so half of that rhyolite is almost 2 ounces per ton silver equivalent. And then you get down to the really high grade core of the rhyolite, and you're looking at 11 meters of, which is a mineable underground width at 420 grams silver equivalent. So pretty much, I guess the point of this story is, if you just looked at all the rhyolite and it was starting at surface or near surface, like we see it in 23 and 16 and in 25, you've got this giant, maybe 250 meters thick, 100 to 250 meters thick, times kilometer, right? Like giant tonnage potential of ultra low grade, but then within that, you also get discrete, high grade, veins and things like that. So yeah, the tonnage potential for the whole rhyolite as a whole is like mind-boggling. Is just what it's looking like just from these 6 holes already.
Yeah, and yeah, the 6 holes is just one portion of the property where there's rhyolite present. If you go west of hole 25-25, the rhyolite package is there. If you go to the south of 25-23, the rhyolite package is there. I'm not sure about the east, but I'm sure we'll find out eventually. And then obviously north is, kind of where it all started due to the Hercules Rhyolite. So it's present. It's present over an extensive area. Let's go back to hole 2506 and talk about the lower plate. What did you find there in hole 2506 in terms of porphyry sniffs, including the gold?
Yeah, so that was sadly lost. So we made it through the unconformity, and the contractor we had at the time lost the hole, but we saw a very narrow interval of bornite chalcocite enrichment. Like so as soon as we got through, there was a little bit of enrichment. Oh wow! But then once we got below the enrichment, we realized, okay, we're still actually in a, we're not in the copper shell. It looked actually like we were in the pyrite shell, right? So we were seeing what we call D veins. So in a porphyry system, for people that aren't familiar with the veins in a porphyry system, they can basically tell you where you are. They could tell you whether you're in the center of the deposit or whether you're on the outer barren pyrite shell. Okay, so at the center of the deposit, you see the A veins, the B veins, and probably C veins as well. So A, B, and C are all copper mineralized. And then on the outskirts of the system, and sometimes collapsing in on the inner part of the system as well, but mostly focused in the outer parts of the system, we see what we call the D veins, right? So these are pyrite veins. And that's what we were seeing in 2506. Now those D veins are restricted to what we call the pyrite shell. So the pyrite shell doesn't go forever, right? So even just like the copper shell, it has a limited width. And so when you see D veins, you're close, but no cigar, right? You're in the pyrite shell, but you're not that far away. You're not way out in the green rock environment. And so that, I would say, is sort of the take home for the porphyry potential in 6. Looked very much like we were in the pyrite shell. So do we go east or do we go west? Well, obviously 25-25 has now gone west. So let's see what happens. Now, the only other interesting thing I can say about the lower plate in 6, so the Triassic, is we're starting to see these weird sniffs of silver, right? So the hole actually ended in like 68 grams silver. Like the last 2 samples averaged 68 grams silver. And we're starting to see sort of like starting to see weird like epithermal, these intermediate sulfidation epithermal veins that we see in the Jurassic. Starting to sort of see signs of them now in the lower plate as well, in the Triassic. Now, why is that important? So we've never seen this before, right? So hundreds of holes, people have been exploring this area for silver for 100 years. You drill through the rhyolite, you get your silver, and then that's it, right? Once you get down below that, it's gone. right? Once you get down into the porphyry, you get copper, you get moly, and you get a different silver. You get porphyry silver, but you don't get silver, lead, zinc, manganese. You don't get intermediate sulfidation silver below it. And so the question has always been, well, where the heck is this silver coming from, right? So the Hercules and the Frogpond, this historical resource, you got a rhyolite units loaded full of silver, but there's no feeder veins. Where did it come from? Well, starting to see some hints of maybe feeder veins below this, and I have a feeling that maybe that's sort of what 6 ended in here. I'll probably leave it at that for now, but to be continued.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that. I read this news release probably 4 times, and I didn't even notice that big uptick in silver at the bottom of hole 2506. And you also kind of gave us a little teaser on hole 2525, which, by the way, that got into the Triassic at 808 meters depth. And I think you said it's about 900 meters now. So you're still, so you're in the Triassic in hole 2525, but you just got into it just, I guess, in the last, week or so. And there's some teasers you can read in the news release about silver, lead, zinc, epithermal veins there in hole 2525. So we're kind of end the year on a cliffhanger with holes 2518 and 2525, Chris. Wow. I got to ask you a couple more questions and then I'll let you go. I know you've been doing a lot of MT surveying over a much wider area. Is there anything you can tell us about new targets that you're finding across the belt?
I can't. Unfortunately, we're not there yet on the belt stuff. So what we did accomplish in this phase 2 survey, which remember the phase 1 MT that we did was done at 1 kilometer station spacing, and so we got this really coarse, really low resolution, really big anomaly, and then we decided, well, I guess before I even get into that, I'll say that really coarse, low resolution anomaly correlated so incredibly well with the known porphyry copper mineralization at Leviathan, like the same southeast dip, completely overlapping. I mean, that was enough to say, okay, clearly the MT works, all right, and then it sort of blows up to the south, right? So it goes from this wide to like way wider, way bigger, way deeper. Everything just blows up, and so we said, okay, let's do another round of MT. Let's take this really broad kilometer spacing that we did over the entire property and infill that, but we're just going to infill it over the anomaly, right? We're obviously not going to infill the entire property. So that's what we got done. And so we've gone from 1,000 meters to 250 meter spacing now over this 5 kilometer long Leviathan anomaly. And so we have started to do some other stuff outside the belt, but that is to be continued. We only made it so far before obviously snow came in, and you don't want to be driving around in wet, muddy roads. It's just a recipe for disaster. And so that's going to continue in the spring, that more regional, more reconnaissance stuff. But we did finish the 250 meter infill over Leviathan and several kilometers over Southern Flats, over something we call Pegasus, which we'll be talking more and more about in the coming months. But that QAQC is now done. The inversion processing is underway, and so I hope that we're going to be seeing a much higher resolution MT anomaly, which is going to really help focus us in at Southern Flats, and it does 2 things. So it shows you obviously these big mineralized systems, these big porphyry systems, like the full sort of outline, full footprint of these porphyry systems at depth. So it helps you target that, but it also does a really good job of showing different rock units. So the basalt cap at Southern Flats is, for some strange reason I'll never understand, very conductive. So you get this really conductive cap. And that's how we figured out that there was actually part of that basalt cap, there was an erosional window in it. And we went and sent mappers out there, and sure enough, there was an erosional window kilometers south of 23 where that altered rhyolite is exposed at surface. So it also kind of shows you how thick the cover is, which is obviously going to feed into the targeting as well. We're not just, you know, aiming at anomalies. We want to aim at anomalies where the cover is a lot less thick too. So yeah, stay tuned for that. I'm obviously pretty excited to see what this phase 2 inversion looks like.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. I feel like the company has never been in a better spot than it is in now, quite frankly. A position of strength with a lot of potential for more discoveries to be made in 2026. I'll give you the final word, Chris. Maybe you want to talk about the new management, addition, the chairman who just joined the company, and maybe a final word to shareholders going into 2026.
Yeah, for sure. So Matt Bos, is someone, he's a guy that, I'd met maybe about 6-9 months ago. He took a keen interest in the company, and so in a way he sort of came to us. He saw the scale of what we were doing. He saw the scale of the Leviathan and thought, I think I can help, right? I really do think I can help. And look, at the end of the day, let's be real. This company needed to strengthen its board, right? This company needed to strengthen its board. And, we looked at a few different candidates, and Matthieu was a very obvious choice. So this is a guy who worked, he was investment banker at BMO, right? Based out of London for a number of years, right? So basically kind of the top, let's face it, the top investment bank in mining. He then, as well, at his tenure at BMO, IPO'd Ivanhoe Mines for Robert Friedland, I think raising like 200 or 250 million, some crazy amount. And then Robert basically asked him, sort of poached him from BMO. And so he left BMO and he became Robert's right-hand man in the Central African Copper Belt, and was a part of the team which discovered the tier 1 Kamoa-Kakula, giant said copper deposit, was able to get, strategic investments in from like Zijin Mining, and, was there through all that development. So I mean, think about the experience that he's had working alongside Robert Friedland. I think that was about 7 years he worked as Robert's right-hand man in Africa. So he's basically dealt with every strategic, he's dealt with every bank, he's dealt with every institution, and he's passionate. He came down this summer. Obviously he wanted to do his DD on the project, and he thought, wow, this is actually, like, operationally, this is run like a well-oiled machine. And so he kind of kept on and on. I really think I can help you guys. And so we made it happen. So I'm obviously really happy. I mean, it's great. I'm really appreciative that he did that and he came and joined us. And I think he is going to help in a lot of corporate development ways for the company moving forward. And obviously it's come at a good time with the old Hercules Silver rearing its ugly head again here at the end of 2025. So yeah, look, things to look forward to. It's taken a minute, but I think we've finally got a really good handle now on this Footwall Zone and where we're going to really grow this thing into 2026. I think we've seen some good cliffhangers in terms of that extension into Southern Flats, right? So we've got sort of we're on the 6th hole here, paused in the lower plate right now. So some definite cliffhanger action going on there that you're going to want to look forward to when we start drilling again, hopefully in early February, weather permitting. But I think the real take home about the silver is what you said about the scale of the rhyolite. The scale of the host unit is mind-boggling at this stage. If you look at just these holes, and it's not a square, it's more like a triangle shape, so it's, but really there's probably a square kilometer of rhyolite here, which is all greater than 100 meters thick, probably an average of maybe 200 meters thick or more, right? So do the math on the tonnage of rhyolite. Now, it's not the tonnage of necessarily mineralization, but we know the mineralization is within that. But we've seen an erosional window a kilometer to the south with more rhyolite. We know there's going to be more rhyolite to the west. We know there's going to be more rhyolite to the south. And so when you start to sort of get a sense of how big this epithermal silver center is, and I believe that's what it is actually this is the center, right? Starting to see feeder veins, starting to see a lot different stuff, starting to see much higher grade tenor of the sulfides here. I think this is going to be a huge part of the story moving forward in tandem with growing the porphyry and some of these new MT anomalies that are starting to take shape. So yeah, a lot I think is going to kick off in a couple months here when we start drilling again.
Chris, thank you. Well said. And the company ends the year 2025 on a high note. New silver discovery in the U.S. Merry Christmas and happy holidays.
Merry Christmas.